Selection Sunday is finally here, so I wanted to do one final bracketology update as we head into the last few games of the conference tournaments before the bracket is announced. And speaking of the bracket, make sure and join my ESPN Bracket Challenge. The link is in the description, and I'll be shouting out whatever subscriber ends up winning. And also, if you enjoy the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, and let's get into it. But before we get into the actual bracketology, I wanted to take a look at some of the semifinal and final matchups that we had today because it was an insane day of college basketball. And starting out, we have Cal Baptist and Utah Valley going at it right now as I'm recording this for the WAC championship, and whoever wins this should be like a 13 or 14 seed in the NCAA tournament. Then we had the Virginia versus Duke game, and this was an absolutely great game. And Virginia put up a really good fight against the Blue Devils, especially for a team that got blown out by almost 30 points in their last matchup. And I'm starting to think that Virginia is going to be a tough out in the tournament and a team that could be a sleeper to make it to a Final Four, as this team is loaded at just about every position. And then for Duke, Caden Boozer actually looked really good, especially in the first half as he steps in that expanded role with Caleb Foster being out. But I'm starting to think that Duke needs them back, or at least Ngungba back, in order to win it all. And then we have Arizona and Houston. Arizona was able to come out with the win and win the Big 12 tournament. And at one point, the Wildcats looked like they were going to run away with it, but Houston battled back and made it a great game, even with Kingston Flemings not having that good of a game for the Cougars. Then we have Michigan versus Wisconsin, and this was definitely one of the best games of the day, as the Badgers were almost able to knock off the Wolverines once again, but Yaxel Lindenborg hit the clutch game-winning three for the Wolverines as they were able to get the win and move on to the Big Ten Finals. Then we had Vanderbilt going up against Florida, and this was the most shocking result for the day. I have to give credit to Vanderbilt for what they were able to do against the Gators, but got a 17-point win on Florida. And this was a Gators team that was looking so good to end the regular season, but they struggled in their two games in the SEC tournament and shot less than 30% from deep in both of those games. But Florida, they might have gotten bailed out and could stay as a 1 seed because Houston, as I mentioned earlier, took a loss, and UConn, who we're going to talk about next, also took a loss. So Florida might still stay as the number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. And as I mentioned, UConn lost to St. John's in the Big East tournament final, and they got absolutely dominated by the Johnnies. And their lack of physicality and not being able to handle heavy defensive pressure is starting to get very concerning for me from the Huskies, and it's something I'm going to be thinking about when filling out my bracket. Then we have Ole Miss going up against Arkansas, and unfortunately, the run of the potential bid thief in Ole Miss came to an end in overtime against the Razorbacks. And AJ Storr had a shot at the end to win it, but it just missed. So Arkansas advances to the SEC tournament finals. Then it was Purdue taking on UCLA, and Purdue looked really solid against the Bruins today, and I'm starting to get some more confidence back in the Boilermakers, but the Big Ten championship game against Michigan will be really interesting and will tell me a lot on how far I'm going to have them going in my bracket. Then we had Yale, who advanced over Cornell to the Ivy League finals once again. UMBC won the America East. Howard won the MEAC. And then probably the best game of the day was this Dayton versus St. Louis game. And in the final 15 seconds of this one, there were back-to-back-to-back buckets, with Dayton prevailing in the end, winning by 1 point. Now, should there have been a technical foul call when the bench player for Dayton came running onto the court while the game was still going? Probably, but I see both sides of it, and now we have a potential 3-bid A10 in the NCAA tournament, which I'm all for, so we'll have to see how the A10 final goes. Then we had Penn actually picking up a win over the 2 seed in the Ivy League, Harvard, in the semifinal to advance to face Yale. Then South Florida, they dominated Charlotte, which is becoming the usual for them in the American, and will face Wichita State in the final now. VCU handled St. Joseph's, and as I mentioned, Wichita State, they beat Tulsa, so we'll be advancing to the finals against South Florida. And then another big game, a very big bubble game for sure, was Utah State and San Diego State. And it was the Aggies who were able to win the Mountain West. And now that more than likely eliminates San Diego State from at-large contention for the NCAA tournament. We had Prairie View A&M upsetting Southern to win the SWAC as an 8 seed. And then another huge game that was probably one of the better ones was Akron going up against Toledo, with Akron winning on a game-winning 3 by Shama Scott to win the MAC championship once again. Then we have Kennesaw State, who was able to win Conference USA, and then Hawaii pulled away at the very end to win the Big West over the 1 seed in UC Irvine. But now let's go ahead and jump into our bracketology. All right, so we're back on ESPN taking a look at Joe Lunardi's updated bracketology, and starting out once again with our bracket watch, we still have Duke as the top overall seed, and to me, they've solidified their spot as the number 1 overall seed by winning the ACC tournament. Then we have Texas, who is the last team in the field, and Oklahoma, who is the first team out. In my bracketology, I actually have Oklahoma over Texas, so I'm really interested to see what the committee does with this decision. But then jumping into the actual bracket, we don't have a lot of movement at the top, as Duke remains the number 1 overall seed, as I mentioned. And I think their head-to-head over Michigan will keep them there regardless if Michigan wins the Big Ten. But Michigan also has a really good resume and is number 1 in the predictive metrics, so that could play a factor in whether or not Duke is the number 1 overall seed. Then another one is St. Louis that I want to call out. They stayed as a 9 seed even after their loss to Dayton and not making it to the A10 finals. I thought there was a chance that Joe Lunardi might drop them back, but it looks like he didn't. Then we have St. John's, who stayed as a 5 seed even with winning the Big East and beating UConn, who will be a top 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. But someone that did jump up, it looks like, is Vanderbilt, who is now a 4 seed after their big win over Florida, which is actually where I had them in my most recent seedings. Arkansas is still a 5 seed, but I would think there was a chance that they could get to the 4 seed if they beat Vanderbilt in the SEC championship game, and maybe those two flip. Miami, Ohio now looks like they're projected to go to Dayton and play in the first 4 against Missouri. Then you have South Florida, who is projected to be an 11 seed as the auto bid out of the American. But if they lose and Wichita State wins, that could change a lot when it comes to the seeding for the auto bids, because I do think Wichita State might be more like a 12 or a 13 seed. Then Illinois is another one that I'm looking at that's a 3 seed with Iowa State as the 2 seed, which feels right to me because some people have that swapped with Illinois being the 2 seed due to their predictive metrics. But I think Iowa State's overall resume is just better than the Illini and maybe even better than Michigan State, who is also in that conversation. We got Hawaii, who is now in the bracket with their win in the Big West championship game as a 14 seed. And I think that matchup with Nebraska would be really interesting. UCLA is up to a 7 seed with their play recently, but they did take that loss to Purdue in the Big Ten semifinals. And then jumping down to the other side of the bracket, we have Florida, who remains Lunardi's last number 1 overall seed, even with their loss to Vanderbilt, but it's mainly due to the other potential 1 seeds like UConn and Houston also losing as well. Kennesaw State and Prairie View A&M are now in after winning their conference tournaments, and they're listed as 16 seeds. He's got Clemson dropping down a seed line to an 8 seed, with UCLA jumping over them, it seems, because they moved up to that 7 line. Texas Tech drops to a 5 seed, and is probably the team that was replaced by Vanderbilt. We have Wisconsin, who moves up to a 5 seed after making it to the Big Ten semifinals and almost beating Michigan for a second time on the season. Gonzaga's now a 4 seed, as well as Alabama. They both got moved back to the 4 line, with Purdue and Virginia, it looks like, jumping up with their recent play, as Purdue now in the Big Ten finals against Michigan, and then Virginia advancing to the ACC finals and just losing to the number 1 overall seeded Duke Blue Devils. Tennessee is down to a 6 seed, and then UMBC, they're a new one in now, and they jumped from a 16 seed to a 15 seed with some of those new teams that are in the field due to the auto bids. And then looking at the bubble, the last 4 buys are Texas A&M, NC State, Santa Clara, and UCF. Last 4 in is Missouri, Miami, Ohio, SMU, and Texas. And then the first 4 out is Oklahoma, Auburn, San Diego State, New Mexico, and then the next 4 out is Indiana, Stanford, Cincinnati, and Seton Hall. So for the last 4 buys, obviously all 4 of these teams are done, but To me, all 4 of these teams are probably safely in the tournament and shouldn't be sweating too much come Selection Sunday. UCF might be the only one just due to their predictive metrics not being the best, but they honestly probably have the best resume metrics out of anyone listed here on the bubble. For the last 4 in, Missouri, Miami, Ohio, SMU, and Texas, I think the conversation really goes around SMU, Texas, and Oklahoma, who is the first team out. I like Oklahoma over Texas, and I would have them as my last team in the field, and then SMU just above them, with Texas being the first team out. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. And then obviously Auburn, to me, too many losses, just shouldn't be able to get into the field with being 1 game above 500 at 17-16. San Diego State not being able to pick up the win in the Mountain West Championship game. Looks like they're going to be on the outside looking in. And then obviously New Mexico, who lost to them in the semifinals, is just behind them. And then the next 4 out of Indiana, Stanford, Cincinnati, and Seton Hall. All of these teams just lost too early in their conference tournaments and needed to get a few more wins in order to get in. So I believe they probably just have no shot at getting in right now. But then looking at the multi-big conferences, we got the SEC at 10, the Big 10 with 9, ACC and Big 12 with 8, Big East and West Coast with 3, the MAC and A10 with 2. And the craziest thing is we're not seeing the Mountain West. So the Mountain West would be a 1-bid league if this is how the bracket turned out. But that wraps it up for this one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below on this bracketology update. Also, I'm curious who you think will be the last 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Will it be Florida, Houston, or UConn? Also, if you enjoy the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.